What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Panels on Pages. Happy New Year. It is the first podcast of 2023, and today I'm going to take on a light task, something breezy to kick the year off with. I'm going to explain the X-Men movie timeline. Now, this is partly in response to a TikTok video where somebody said, I forget how it started, honestly, but they mentioned that the X-Men movie timeline is like crazy, and I said the X-Men movie continuity is not that not that complicated, right? It's not that difficult, and they responded to me in full full video and just gave me all these grievances. So I'm going to start by addressing those, and I'm going to touch on a couple other things as well. So first and foremost, we want to talk about the difference of Logan and Sabretooth, right? In the original X-Men trilogy, we had Sabretooth, and he was a different actor. First and foremost, actually, point zero. We're not going to discuss actors being different actors in different movies. The characters are the same. We're just going to accept that and move on. We can address logical fallacies, but the actual actors doesn't matter. So Sabretooth in the original X-Men movie and Sabretooth in Wolverine Origins, same guy. Now, this creator specifically said that they had a problem with the fact that Wolverine and Sabretooth both had their memories taken away, so they didn't remember each other at the beginning of X-Men. But if you'll remember, there was a familiarity. Sabretooth grabs his Logan's dog tags, and there's something, right? There's something. Why can we not accept this? I actually honestly thought this was the weirdest complaint about the entire thing, because there are so many other better complaints. Wolverine and Sabretooth, throughout the history of comics, have both been subjected to massive tampering with their brains. Part of the allure of Logan for decades was the fact that he didn't know who he was. So he could have been anybody, this mysterious past. And he had multiple fake histories implanted. Who's to say the same thing didn't happen to Sabretooth at some point? Department H or Department X or Weapon X or whoever was in charge of him at one point decides we don't really want him anymore. We need him to not remember his time here. Give him something different. Give him a different past. And amidst all that, however many times it happened to Sabretooth and however many times it happened to Logan over the years, they both forgot each other because their memories were overwritten. This is part of both of those characters. So it's like, I don't understand why that's hard to that's a weird one for me, honestly. That's a super weird one, but wanted to just touch on that one real quick. It's pretty straightforward. Their memories were messed with multiple times by presumably multiple government agencies. Now, this one I understand. This one's been weird, okay? The resurrection of the Saint Xavier. Xavier dies in X-Men 3. Spoilers, I guess. In X-Men 3, Xavier dies is effectively disincorporated, like molecularized by Phoenix. However, if you recall at the end of the movie, a post-credit scene or mid-credits, I don't even know how to place these things anymore, was that you go back to Muir Island. It was a callback to the beginning of the film where they were talking about the ethics of putting someone else's brain inside a completely brainless mutant body. So the ease of saying that was Morph, and then when Xavier woke up, that's why he sounded like himself. Instinctively, he took over Morph's abilities and just looked and sounded like Xavier. And because of his history with his broken back, he didn't have the instinctual knowledge to be able to walk. That was the prevailing theory at the time. So to say that there's no explanation, that's silly. That is absolutely an explanation. It makes sense within the universe. And the fact that they set it up and called back to it, we know that's what happened. At least the brain transfer. But the fact that he sounded the same, I think automatically tells us that it was some sort of shape-shifting or maybe power-absorbing mutant that automatically just gained Xavier's self. It became Xavier. In all effects, it was Xavier. Now, the second death in Logan is also brought up, but that is a far-flung future, later even than the horrific future of the Days of the Future Past story. So Xavier's dead. Old, ancient, decrepit Xavier dies. Now, the costumes question, that was another question at the end of, I believe it was X-Men Apocalypse. We got the whole team together, and, we got this shot of the X-Men in costume. And the creator said, that we were promised these costumes. There was no promise. They just showed us them after the events of Apocalypse in costume, meaning that they function as a team. But when we get to X-Men Dark Phoenix, many years have passed, about a decade. Pick up 3 comics across a decade of X-Men comics and show me that the same person has the same costume that they had at the beginning and the end. Very unlikely. Very unlikely. Redesigning costumes, especially in the X-Men lineup, is essentially a tradition for new creative teams. So there's not a single character that has gone 10 full years in the same single costume. Hell, the original X-Men didn't even make it out of their original run, the original 63 issues, without a costume change, without 3 costume changes, if I'm not mistaken. So, costume changes happen. So, yeah, we saw the first full X-Men team costume. Then later, they just got new stuff, different stuff. The point is, that's not even a thing. Again, kind of a non-issue to bring up, honestly. There are really, really so many better ones. One of which, of course, is the Phoenix Force fiasco. Okay, so this creator brought up the point that in X-Men Apocalypse, she summons the Phoenix Force. She, in fact, does not. She unlocks her access to the Phoenix Force. If you recall, Xavier tells her to just let it out, as in, hey, remember when you were a kid? See the beginning of X3. We locked that shit up. Let that shit go because we need it right now. So that's what happened there. So the events of X3, at the beginning of X3, they say that when she was very young, so before the Institute, before they were together, potentially before even the original X-Men team, they went to the Gray House and they helped her lock down this wellspring of power. Now, the easy explanation to this is that the Phoenix entity, through Cosmos, which is not unheard of, especially in the comics, reached out to her, tried to maybe take her as a host then, and thankfully Xavier was like, whoops, nope, we're gonna lock that down. And thus, later on in life, when she unleashes that, when she dies effectively, she comes back as the Phoenix. So post Days of Future Past, we had Apocalypse show up way sooner than he would have potentially in the original timeline. And Xavier's like, hey, we need a Hail Mary, so I'm going to tell her to unlock this ability. Well, which maybe he thinks is just an ability, just like an extension of her abilities, and that doesn't realize that the Phoenix is a different entity. And then we get the Dark Phoenix story, which was weak. It was weak, let's be honest. Now, the fact that the timeline is a mess is the final point that this creator brought up, and I wanted to just touch on that in a very visual fashion. So we're going to go to the top down here, and I'm going to give you my explanation for what the X-Men timeline looks like. 2 options. First, the easy answer, multiverse, right? I'm not even going to write that down. Multiverse. Any inconsistencies, it's just a different universe. Things played out a little differently, right? That's the easy answer, right? After the events of Loki, all the multiverses were retroactive. That's a different multiverse. Just like the different Spider multiverses, that's just a different multiverse. That's easy. That's the easy answer. We're not even going to count that one. All right, so let's talk about the timeline. This is where things do get a little complex, but it's not that complicated, which is my whole premise here. Now, we have the original timeline as it would have been. First Class, at some point after that, Wolverine Origins, way after that, X-Men, X2, X3. And then the future of that is the Days of Future Past timeline. So all of that happens on one timeline. As soon as Logan leaves, he goes back to the events of 1973, which is before Wolverine Origins, and that's the Days of Future Past events in 1973. So now we are in a new timeline. However, since at the end of this movie, we see Wolverine go back to the future, and he is now in a happy future where Jean's alive and things came out differently, that means we are working with a singular timeline model. So as soon as this happens and he lands back here, all of this is gone. And the fact that they keep showing us deaths from up here, all of that is useless. It's pointless because it's a movie that we're following the good guy, the protagonist. We know he's going to win, so we know he's going to succeed in his mission. Therefore, the new timeline supersedes all of those things. So yeah, they all die, but it doesn't matter because he ends up going back to the new version of that time frame. So he wakes up, Xavier's still teaching, and all of the other good things. Sorry, of course I should have thrown in The Wolverine up here. That's the one I always forget about. It's a good movie, but it's kind of in passing. And again, we know that one happens on the original timeline because they recruit him to fight in what will eventually become the massive war that's been going on at the beginning of Days of Future Past. So that's the original timeline. Now, the new timeline is the events of Days of Future Past in 1983, let's say, X-Men Apocalypse, and then 1993, X-Men Dark Phoenix. At some point between here and here, we have New Mutants, Deadpool 1 and 2, and also presumably Deadpool 3, because they've said that he's not going to affect the events of Logan, which happen over here. And that's the only one that's nebulous. That's honestly the one that's nebulous because we're never given the reason as to why Xavier's powers are on the fritz, but we're also not explained why Xavier is so long-lived. Like in Logan, Logan is turning gray. It's not just the fact that Xavier's still around. Logan is turning gray. So that means it happens way after any of this stuff, which then makes me believe that we are in the original timeline because it has long been accepted basically by, it was the prevailing theory when it came out, and it is long, I understood it to be long since believed that the way that we get Xavier back at the end of the Wolverine from X3 is the fact that he body jumps into Morph or someone similar's body, and that's how he's able to essentially replicate his abilities and all that stuff. And the fact that he's wheelchair bound because he just hasn't used, like, his brain hasn't moved legs, so that when he wakes up, he just hasn't moved those legs. And also the fact that that body's been comatose for a long time, the muscles could simply be atrophied. So like the reason for his being wheelchair bound in the Wolverine and on could very well just be the fact that this body has been comatose for a very long time. So like the leg muscles could have simply atrophied, and because he's not used to moving leg muscles, he just, I mean, this is a storyline that happened in the comics. So that's just, I don't know. It seems pretty plausible. Obviously, it is guesswork because we don't know exactly how he came back, but that is the thing that explains it all, honestly. I mean, like, we know Mystique exists, so like, why couldn't Morph or someone like Morph who has more abilities to copy powers, like Mimic, for instance. Mimic could, I don't know, who knows? I mean, like, there's ways, I mean, like, there's simple ways to explain it within the X-Men canon, like with existing X-Men stuff. So anyway, he's in a body that has some sort of regenerative abilities, which has extended him, given him longevity, which is why he's at the same stage as Logan, essentially. He's old, granted he's older than Logan, but we're talking, there have been decades since, you know, the world was nice and pretty and stuff at the end of Days of Future Past. At minimum years, but I would say minimum a decade based on on-screen, like, evidence. The only thing that drives me to put Logan in the new timeline is the fact that Laura is created by the Essex Corporation, which we see, I believe it was in the end of X-Men Apocalypse, and in New Mutants. But that is not to say that Essex didn't exist or couldn't have existed in the original timeline. He most likely did, because if they would have gone, let's say if they had kept making those movies in that universe, which would have been insane, but if they had chosen to make movies in that universe continuing, and brought in Sinister proper, he probably would have had the same origin, which would have been Victorian era, which would have been way back this way, so presumably he exists in both universes. So I think it's most plausible for Logan to be in the original timeline. That's really the only point of contention, and that is by far the best of the movies. So you gotta give it the most leeway. It doesn't really matter how we got there. It's the story that's being told. Now, all of the items that were brought up regarding the complexity, these are the things that I really thought would get the attention. The fact that we have 2 Psylocks, 2 2 Jubilees, and 2 Angels, and also 2 different Colossus. Okay, first one, easy to explain. The one from X3 is Quanon. Easy to explain. Jubes, not easy to explain, but basically instead of being born around here, she's born a decade earlier, maybe due to the events in X-Men Days of Future Past. Her parents, I don't know, have sex sooner. Like, this is like a simple butterfly effect explanation. Like, it's not something that needs a ton of explanation, right? Colossus, that one is a little more complex to explain, but that's just because in the original timeline, the very public, very massive events in, with the president and everything and that football field, none of that happened. So America seemed like a much safer place, and the Rasputins moved there either with their baby boy or soon-to-be-born baby Colossus, and he grew up in America, which is why in X-Men, X2, and X3, I forget if he was in X3, which is why he doesn't have an accent, and why in Deadpool 1 and 2 he has an accent, because they had him in Russia and moved at some point in the timeline to America, or they died and he and his sister moved, and she was younger, so she picked up the accent. Like, I'm from another country, you wouldn't know it if I didn't tell you, because kids pick up accents way easier. So that's Colossus explained, pretty straightforward. The one thing I can't explain is Angel. I can't explain Angel. My original thought was, because of the events of Days of Future Past, Worthington Sr. is, gets like a government contract to like fight the mutants or whatever, and like they have a big celebration, and they have sex sooner, and they make the baby. Except the problem is he was already in his late teens, early 20s in X-Men Apocalypse, which puts him being born either during the events of or literally right before the events of Days of Future Past at the earliest, or at the latest. So like this Angel from X-Men Apocalypse was born over here somewhere, and I cannot explain that away. There's not enough time for him to be like the second, and this one to be the third in X3. There's just not enough time. The one that I thought would be the one to like be hard to explain, which is Trask. Trask the younger, Trask the first, Bolivar Trask the first, Bolivar Trask the second. That's his son or adopted son. Like, plenty of real world ways for that to be the same name. He just doesn't use his junior or whatever. Was he a lieutenant or, I don't know, General Trask or something like that? Whatever. Yeah, Angel's the only one I can't explain. Angel is the only one I cannot explain, and it really irks me. It really irks me. But ultimately, you can also just write it as original timeline right here to this, and when this happens, or even this, really, yeah, even first class, and then this is a new timeline. Because, and I'm going to ruin your day right now, if you go and watch Back to the Future, the original Back to the Future, that is a universe with multiple timelines, and the fact, as soon as Marty lands in the past, he changes the future, and there is, in effect, no practical reason for that new universe as Marty to go back in time, yet he does. So there's something else that happened that sparked him to go to the past. We don't know to when. Potentially 1955, but we don't know. Yeah. Which is unfortunate, but essentially that's what that is, right? Not super complicated. I don't think that's that complicated, right? That could be worse. Could be way worse. That could be like explaining the actual X-Men timeline, which would be just so many lines. And yeah, I'm wearing a different shirt because the first time I did this, I forgot about a bunch of movies. So I redid this, and here's the original outro. yeah, that's where we're gonna leave it. I don't really have anything else to say on the timeline of the X-Men. This is ridiculous. I'm hoping that we get a ton more cameos before Secret Wars, and that in Secret Wars, I hope they give everybody a little bit of money to show up. I want every X person who has ever been on screen to be in Secret Wars in some fashion. I don't care how. I want them all there. I want 3 Jean Greys staring at each other. Just do it. Do it. Anyway, that's going to be it for this one. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you in the next one.
Before they go living, my vision is vivid. I wander the places they marvel. The shit that I'm talking is low-key a novel. Yeah, I'm so lit, but a lonely spark. About to end game like Tony Stark.